Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Safehouse, brought to you by the Safehouse Initiative. I'm Jeff Edwards, co-chair of the Safehouse Initiative, and your host for today's podcast. How can private and public sectors work together more effectively with the ultimate goal of protecting American businesses and protecting America? And today we're very, very fortunate to have Alex Green with us. And Alex Green is one of the thought leaders that has written a white paper on behalf of the as a member of the Redwood Project. So first off, let's get to know Alex, and then let's get to know the Redwood Project just a little bit more too. Hey, Alex, welcome to the Safe House.
Hey, Jeff, thanks.
Hey, first time on the show, but why don't you introduce yourself, kind of your journey to how you got to be where you are today and involved with the Redwood Project. But you can start as far back as I was born in a cabin, if you'd like.
All right. Well, we'll skip the cabin, but today, I'm joining as a member of the Redwood Project. And really, it's a nonprofit oriented around protecting U.S. businesses from cybersecurity threats. And right now, we've taken more of the stance that we can have the most positive outcomes from fixing relationship between the private and public sectors. Now, going back the timeline a bit, I'll start my timeline back in the Army Special Operations with the 75th Ranger Regiment. And back in those days, I just joined more as someone to kick down doors for a while, but they quickly figured out I was the computer guy. So they brought me onto electronic warfare. And at the time, I was more of the mind of, cool, what's that? And then I really started to get exposure around electronic exploitation, what we're actually protecting, and how our adversaries take advantage of some of the weaknesses.
And what year was this, Alex? Just curious.
Oh, yeah, this was from 2010 to 2014.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, once I left the military, joined the commercial world, and started working as a security analyst, working up the chain there, building out a global security operations center. Moved around a bit in the financial services vertical, eventually leading some of the security engineering, application security, and a couple other practices with H&R Block. And from there, moved over to academia for a while, leading some offensive security programs for DoD contracts. And then I had the opportunity to join Delta Dental as their chief information security officer. So that is my day job.
Wow, that's great. That's quite an adventure. What a background.
Thank you. It's been fun.
So how'd you get involved with the Redwood Project and to what end? I think you wrote really spearheaded the white paper that has come out to help define some of the way forward for this country.
Yeah, good question. I came across the Redwood Project through my dealings with 3 Tree Tech as a tech scout, and really looking for more of the cutting edge cybersecurity services that I could bring to the commercial world to solve our problems. And through those discussions, it kind of turned more into, okay, what is the root of the problem we're trying to solve? Rather than building the better mousetrap, let's try and figure out what we're actually trying to do here. And then that ended up coinciding with a few like-minded individuals that led to what the Redwood Project is today.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so your thought leader, this white paper, what is the basic premise of it? It's I think I've heard something about a federal enterprise or a better working relationship between private and public sector. Is that sort of on the right track?
Yeah, so we dubbed this the Federal Cyber Enterprise, and that hits on a few key things. One, in that we believe that we need to reapproach how cybersecurity is ultimately worked in the overall government.
Okay.
But then how do we fix the relationship between the companies that we're trying to protect that ultimately make up the significant portion of our national security? And how do we make that a better team effort?
Okay. The team between the government and the private enterprise.
Yes.
I got it. Okay. And that assumes that the small, mid-sized businesses figure into that also. Is that a separate challenge, or is that a little along the same vein?
I'd say it's along the exact same vein. I mean, realistically, our adversaries, they're targeting us holistically, and they're going to hit whatever they can find if they don't have a specific target in mind, which generally speaking, it's a spray and pray approach. And that's where a lot of these cybersecurity losses are being realized in this country.
Interesting. So, what is the challenge with the public and private sector as you see it today, and how and what is kind of the way forward? Can you kind of lay that out for us?
Yeah, well, kind of alluding to the name, I think one of the issues is that we as society and the government have not scaled cybersecurity effectively
Hmm.
as this domain has matured. And that's
Awesome.
led to, in the federal space, just a huge amount of duplicated efforts, conflicting strategies, an enormous duplicative spend.
Hmm.
And then meanwhile, the private sector is going about it in completely its own way, trying to defend the private castle as they
Yeah.
can.
Yeah. Well, the current administration probably this is a very positive time for such an approach, I would think.
It is, yeah, and it's interesting because we see a lot of opposition to treating the government as a company. And while I don't think that's entirely wrong, I think there's a lot of um, good aspects that we can take from that mindset. Hence, if we build out something core like cybersecurity as
Hmm.
an enterprise concept, and if we can scale that effectively in government, I
Yeah.
think we're going to be a lot more successful.
So, would the funding be kind of a collaborative funding effort between public and private?
Not necessarily. I think there's a few aspects to there. The
Okay.
funding piece would be more well, actually before funding, it's more how do we fix cybersecurity in the government. I
Okay.
think with a lot of the realignment with the roles and responsibilities, now is a good time to tackle that in the
Yeah.
sense of how can we build a more holistic cybersecurity program that the government can treat as the government program. But as we get into, well, essentially, I believe that can be self-funded by deduplicating all of the individual efforts that our agencies are undergoing today.
Right.
But along that process, it's really getting down to the point of where is the right level of partnership with the private sector? What
Hmm.
level of intelligence sharing is there? How do we encourage um, private industry to share their findings back to government? And that's a huge gap today in that there's very little of that going on.
And why is that, Alex?
I think there's a number of reasons. One, it's fear. I've worked for a number of companies that when we do get certain intelligence or we do have a certain incident, I've gone to my legal practically every time and say, "Hey, can I share this
Yeah.
with the FBI?"
Yeah.
Because the FBI has a channel for that, and
Uh-huh.
every single time the answer's been no. For the
Really?
sake of they don't want to invite authoritative scrutiny, I guess you could say. They don't
Huh.
want the FBI to start looking at us more closely because they don't want to necessarily, um, not that we're doing anything wrong, but like the legal teams, they've collectively decided, and I'm saying this kind of collectively in the private sector,
Huh.
that they don't want this level of scrutiny in their house willingly.
Yeah. Now, are there restrictions? You're talking about the legal aspects and sharing information freely. There are some limitations to that with some safe harbor type of aspects. Is that correct? Did I understand that correctly?
To a degree, yes, and that's more of being shielded from lawsuits if you construct your cybersecurity program to certain expectations in line with government standards. But it doesn't so much protect you from intelligence sharing, and I'm harping a
Mm.
lot on the intelligence sharing, but it's kind of a key piece of how this relationship can exist in a beneficial way that isn't supported today.
Interesting. So how do you so first of all, I think there's duplication of so funding is by deduplicating some of the funding efforts and the overlap that happens within government agencies and how it interrelates with the private sector. There's some funding aspects there that can be had, and then in terms of free sharing, that seems to be the other pin that needs to be kind of smoothed out too. Did I hear that right?
Yes, yeah.
So from a from a mindset historically, the United States are we more waiting to be hit and more defensive in nature? Are we evolving to more of an offensive type of a mindset, or is there any thought of that at all in your paper?
There's there are definitely some thoughts along the offensive path, but I would say today we are much more defensive in nature. And the idea is to stay within the bounds of the current legislation, effectively, which specifically outline ways to structure cybersecurity defense capabilities. But offensive capabilities are really limited for military type purposes.
Okay.
And that's one of the um, that's one of the ways we have ourselves in an awkward situation here, because
Oh,
warfare is traditionally considered it's either armed conflict or it's not. And it hasn't really evolved considering the gray area of what cybersecurity impacts.
critical infrastructure. Is that a good starting spot, you think? Because that seems to be a good crossover between private and public sector, and it gets to the very essentials of protecting, our way of life.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's where some channels exist today, but it's still very piecemeal. It doesn't exist. It's not the same across all agencies. It's more just we'll figure out which ones we want to partner with, or for some critical infrastructure specifically, they have mandated methods of engagement. But it's very limited to that today.
So what is so if we're taking a step back, where do you begin? Where do you suggest as a starting point, and how does that evolve, and how does it roll out?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple ways to tackle this. One in
Uh-huh.
the sense of having a more business-led or private sector-led cybersecurity council,
Okay.
understanding more boots on the ground. This is what we are facing on a daily basis. From the federal standpoint, they kind of have that today as they can, but
Yeah.
realistically, it's the businesses that are facing most of the financial loss. So
Okay.
it needs to be a more intentional partnership. And as we've seen, some of the government-led approaches in the past haven't been entirely effective. So maybe
Okay.
we try an industry-led approach now, where we can have a stronger voice in terms of, well, I'll take a different approach as well, in the sense of government's here to work for us, right?
Yeah. It's
So
we. Yeah.
if they're driving their own agenda in terms of what they believe is necessary from a cybersecurity standpoint,
Yeah.
that's working in the wrong direction, in my mind.
Okay.
So if we take the private sector um, industry leaders and lead the more intentional counsel on how we can be more effective, I think we're going to see a lot more positive change.
Yeah. So you're kind of flipping the script on its head, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So you create a council of enterprise, have it be led like an entity, like a Redwood Project or something along those lines, and then have the government agencies help coordinate through there, but the priorities being set through the commercial lens as opposed to the government lens.
Exactly. Yeah.
Ah, interesting. So, how do you decide the commercial entities that would be a part of it? How is that determined?
Good question. Well, I'll go back to your earlier comment where I think critical infrastructure is absolutely the right place to start. That's going to
Ah, okay.
have the
Okay.
most immediate crossover to national security priorities.
Okay.
And
All
then,
right.
critical infrastructure is also a bit of a misnomer because people hear that they think like, okay, nuclear power,
Uh-huh.
critical utilities, but it's a
Yep.
lot more than that. Financial
Yeah.
services and
Yeah.
healthcare, that is critical infrastructure.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we take leaders from those spaces, get them together to agree on priorities and ways that we're going to better defend our nation,
Yeah.
and we're going to start seeing better conclusions in my mind.
Yeah, because you're not defending the critical infrastructure, the financial services or healthcare, but you're defending jobs and the whole economy, economic economy, the health and well-being of its citizens.
Exactly.
And then that would probably create some alignment through efficiencies, because that's usually you associate businesses with being efficient for the need to be profitable. In this case, it would be just streamlining operations, so you're not having duplication across multiple government sectors, it can be streamlined with through the lens, like you said, of the a commercial entity.
Yes. Yeah. And one more point I'll add to that in the sense of the government priorities, the way they get there now, just kind of harping on the enterprise structure.
Yeah.
We have all the different agencies who have their own cybersecurity funding, their own ways in which they're approaching cybersecurity. And the collaboration as a result, even internally to the federal government, just isn't there. And
Yeah.
I'll take the setting of, you know how when you're a kid and you look at adults and you say like, oh, they have it figured out. They know what they're doing.
Yep.
And then you get your first real job and you're like, okay, well, the people at the top know what they're doing. And then you kind of keep going and you're like, wow, okay, we don't know what we're doing. That's the
Yeah.
same thing with government. Speaking from the military in respect to, we figure everyone else has it figured out, but it's just not the case.
Well, with critical infrastructure, they have the ISAC, the information sharing entities, right? There's like 16 or 17 critical infrastructures, of which finance is one, and healthcare and things of that nature. Could they be like sub-segments of this? Because they're kind of an amalgamation of members that are commercial in nature. Is that correct?
They are, and actually that's a perfect example of really the discrepancy between effectiveness. Because yes, the ISACs for short are very helpful, and in some cases, from my experience, the most valuable source of intelligence. But
Ah,
what we have from there is two pieces. One is the open information sharing between the members of each ISAC, and
okay.
then we have kind of the official threat bulletins that come out of the ISACs.
Okay.
And what I mean by discrepancy is the more valuable information is that real-time shared, hey, we saw this, we think it's associated with this, I reverse engineered this and found this. And then by the time you get these larger reports, not going to say they're useless, but most of the time it's old information.
Yeah.
It's a little too late to act on that data.
Yeah, and in this day and age, the way things are moving so fast with, artificial intelligence probably not helping, it's accelerating the attacks. It's accelerating the learning that's happening and how to penetrate and how to exploit weaknesses. Is that a fair statement?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's affecting both sides,
Okay.
which in my mind's good. We'll figure it out one way or another. But yeah, the bad guys are absolutely using some of these learning concepts. I mean, as an easy example, crafting more convincing phishing emails is a
Mm, yeah.
attack vector we've seen a lot more of recently. But to the same vein, I mean, we've as defenders been able to take some of the learnings from AI, or I should say, impart our learnings onto the AI and have it continue taking advantage of whatever we feed it. So I think the attackers are continuing to outpace us. But AI is just another technology in the stack that's going to accelerate both sides.
Yeah. Well, with the heavier involvement of the commercial aspects, I mean, they're driving forward on AI on a commercial basis. So employing that to help defend against, the other, the bad guys' AI is going to probably be a much better playing field than having the government-led type approach.
I think so.
So what are the biggest blockers we have right now that if you had three blockers you want to take out of the whole mix to make this thing fall into place? Is it legislation? Is it what is it?
I think it's, yeah, rather than, I'll go back to the mousetrap example. Let's stop refining the legislation that's in place. Let's take a step
Uh-huh.
back and look at what we want cybersecurity initiatives to accomplish.
Okay.
And I think we'll realize that with the goal of securing our nation, our nation's businesses, our nation's infrastructure, we need to approach it in more of an enterprise viewpoint.
Okay.
So that is, I'll go back to the example of not having every agency duplicate efforts around
Yes.
collection, analysis, et cetera, and figure out how to use that more proactively to really pursue the mission of defense.
Yeah.
And I mean, one example I'll give to that is our federal government realistically should have the largest subset of cybersecurity intelligence that exists.
Yeah.
Being the largest employer, having an incredible amount of well, one, employees, but two, systems and endpoints. But if you don't collectively work with that information and you keep them off in their own little silos, we're not
Yeah.
going to be able to draw the bigger conclusions from that. So centralize the cybersecurity goal for the federal government
Yep.
and understand and set policy that can then cascade down more effectively rather than building silos.
So along those lines, one of the first things I would imagine this new commercial or this enterprise entity would do is to take stock and inventory of all the assets, all the create all the defensive assets that exist, and then take that deduplicated layer and reallocate and repoint them to different activities. I guess is that kind of a first step in this?
So if each agency has its own security leader operating independently from, let's say, the head cyber initiatives of the federal government,
Hmm.
and I'm not naming names on purpose,
Yeah.
this is how we get disparate goals and efforts. So it's more how do we ensure alignment up the
Yep.
chain through these agencies so we can
Yep.
operate not only under a similar, or I should say, the exact same framework, but how do we then more collectively at a technical level just aggregate logs? Even if I want to search for, let's say, I'll go with a specific example.
Yeah.
Let's say there's a Russian IP address that is of
Yep.
question, and I want to
Yep.
search across all the federal space if that IP has come into contact with any of our assets. To my knowledge, there is no way of doing that today. It's more of a we need to go out to all individual agencies and request that. So back to the enterprise
Huh.
concept, that's not efficient. By the time you get your answer, it's too late.
So let me ask you a question. The ONCD is supposed to be a coordinating, not a coordinating effort. The ONCD is really the set policies theoretically, and then CISA is out there trying to share. So how does CISA play into this, or do we take advantage of what they've built and then kind of move it into a more refined, more focused type of an environment, or is there not a need for a CISA in the future?
I think in some form there is a need. So
Uh-huh.
I'll give an example of as a private sector partner, we had CISA reach out to us in regard to something that they found during one of their investigations.
Okay.
And that gave us more valuable intelligence than really any other way we could have obtained that information.
Okay. Hmm.
But the funny part is, as they gave us that information, they straight up said that they were doing this basically out of the kindness of their hearts because they were not congressionally funded to do that. So the only direct benefit that I realized from CISA as a private sector partner, they weren't congressionally funded to do.
Oh
So
my.
I think it's realigning
Yeah.
the purpose of CISA, the purpose
Yeah.
of these entities. So I don't disagree with the CISA mission. I disagree with the way it's orchestrated in the sense that if they're going to share information, if they're going to facilitate the sharing of information,
Yeah.
we need to do so more effectively in kind of realignment to the goal of protecting America and its businesses.
Well, in terms of resources, I could think of like the NIST National, Center of Excellence. Sherry and her team have some fantastic resources, and they do some great collaborative work. And so, as I'm seeing it, so it sounds like the CISAs and the NIST, they have elements that could contribute, but just need to be refined and focused differently. Is what I'm hearing. Could be wrong. Did I hear that correctly? Potentially.
You did. Yeah. And NIST is a good example of resources that help in the sense of how to structure a security program, what to actually focus
Yeah.
on, what
Yeah.
levels of maturity matter and how to achieve them. That's all good. I
Yeah.
think it's then just the execution there of how do we enact some of these efforts and really again towards that end goal of once these frameworks are realistically in place at whatever
Yeah.
scope you're implementing them, now what?
Yeah.
Because with the example of, let's take the healthcare space, for example. I can't think of a single hospital that's been hacked that hasn't been certified. They've all upheld all their certifications.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
and I'm not going to play the game of checkbox security versus actual security, but it's not enough. So these frameworks really help kind of make it harder to get breached.
Yeah.
They make your job as a defender easier in some ways and ultimately reduce the risk, because that risk management is the goal of any cybersecurity practitioner.
Yeah.
But it's not enough.
So do you think that to do this, sometimes you have to build a prototype, and maybe you pick one out of the critical infrastructures, the one, maybe it's finance or maybe it's healthcare. You say, okay, let's take this and maybe spearhead how we organize for this particular critical infrastructure, because then people can start to say, oh, I understand what you're saying now, and oh, I get that, and I'm on board with that. Is that an approach that would make sense?
I'm not sure. I think that's a good example of some of the intricacies we need to sort out, in the sense
Mm.
of, there you run the risk of then establishing a system around one type of environment. And you won't know that doesn't
Um,
scale out to others until it's too late. So that's why, in my mind, it'll be more effective to have kind of that
holistic.
consolidated council of cross various expertise to be more effective there. That way you get input from the financial sector, from the power
Uh-huh.
companies running nuclear power plants, and
Yep.
you'll get some of those nuances that come in from the different sectors.
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense, because otherwise you end up with another 2008 type of thing with the financial meltdown and all the structure and the safe harbor and things of that nature that came and just focused on the financial sector pretty much, and that it didn't affect the rest. It'd be the same kind of thing, I would think, to do it here, but for cyber.
Yeah, exactly.
So what's next for the Redwood Project? Just curious as to, as you advocate and move this forward as thought leaders, making this integrated or a whole different approach, much more commercially oriented. What's next, or can you share that with us?
Yeah, I think part of it is just getting that larger voice around improving the state of cybersecurity. And
Uh,
with our, I guess, with the increasing financial loss that we've seen and direct impact to people's lives that we've seen
yeah.
from these larger scale cyber attacks, we need to fix this problem. So it's, one, growing that mission and understanding how we can better collaborate,
Hmm.
understanding how the federal government can realistically be a better supporter of this defense,
Yeah.
and it's more specifically addressing that gray area of not armed conflict, but we're not at peacetime either. If we're constantly defending against attacks that are causing harm,
Yeah.
so it's, how do we better position policy around that gray area, and how do we enact actual protections that are ultimately making a difference?
Interesting. So for our audience, if you had one thing to leave with them today in terms of how they could protect themselves better, or to make themselves safer, what would that one thing be? Just curious, Alex.
Yeah, I think in a sentence I would say, make yourself a harder target.
Hmm.
And there's a bit of military speak in that, in the sense that we can hit soft targets all day. It's easy.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
those are the people that are using password 123 as their passwords. When we say make yourself a harder target, it means make yourself less desirable in an attacker's eyes. So,
Okay.
one thing to remember is, these attackers aren't targeting you necessarily. They're
Mhm.
targeting the soft targets. So if you
Yeah.
reuse passwords, and they get, let's say they hack a website, they get a whole list of usernames and passwords.
Hmm.
They're going to try to log in to as many accounts as they can with that list, because it's easy. And if you are using the same email and password on other services, that's probably how you're going to get hit. So it's, how do you make yourself a harder target so you don't fall victim uh, to these widespread attacks?
Yeah, and if you think that way, then as a small mid-sized business, I hear this all the time. The small mid-sized business is like, well, I have nothing. There's no way somebody's going to find me and pick me out of the crowd, and that's not true. And it's not personal when they do pick you. It's just you happen to be that soft target, right?
Exactly.
Ah, makes so much sense. Well, Alex, it sounds like you got your work cut out for you, along with the Redwood Project. Would you come back and kind of keep us up to date on how things are progressing? And, we'll do everything we can to get the word out here for you.
Oh, I'd be happy to. Thank you.
Well, Alex, I tell you what, your insights are fantastic, and I think it's going to help a lot of people rethink, especially that become a harder target. I think that's great advice. So thank you so much for your insights, and looking forward to having you come back and give us an update here in the next year.
All right. Well, thanks for having me, Jeff.
Thank you, Alex. That's our podcast for today. I'm Jeff Edwards for the Safehouse Initiative. Thanks for joining us, and remember, be safe, be resilient, and be kind to each other. For more information about the Safehouse Initiative, please use your mobile device to scan the QR code on the screen, or send us an email at info@safehouseinitiative.org, or visit us on our website, safehouseinitiative.org. We look forward to hearing from you.